France was a nation on fire. The year 1789 had torn the old world apart. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity echoed through the streets of Paris, but so did the screams of the condemned. The dream of revolution was on the verge of becoming a nightmare as the nation found itself at war with itself and its neighbors. In this cauldron of chaos, a new kind of power was being forged. Not the power of birthright, but the power of ambition, of ruthlessness, and of opportunity. Into this world of fire, blood, and endless war, a young man arrived, an outsider, a minor noble from Corsica. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. His story would become the story of an entire age. To understand the man who would dominate an age, we must first understand the age that created him. The late 18th century was a crucible of fire and ideas. France, having overthrown a monarchy, was adrift in a sea of chaos. The reign of terror had given way to the Directory, a government weak, corrupt, and incapable of healing a fractured nation. The country yearned for order, for stability, for a hero to emerge from the turmoil. That hero's story begins not in the glittering salons of Paris, but on a rugged island in the Mediterranean. Napoleon's beginnings were humble, born Napoleon di Buonaparte in 1769 on the island of Corsica, a land with a fierce spirit of independence, only recently annexed by France. His family were minor Italian nobility, respectable but far from wealthy. This dual identity, neither truly French nor purely Corsican, would shape his perspective for life. He was a man of the periphery, destined to conquer the center. Sent to military school in mainland France at the age of 9, he was an outsider. His Corsican accent was mocked, his relative poverty a source of shame among aristocratic classmates. This outsider feeling fueled a burning desire to rise above the station of his birth, to prove his worth through sheer intellect and will. He found his calling in the artillery, a technical and meritocratic branch of the army where mathematics and precision mattered more than lineage. It was the perfect field for a brilliant, ambitious mind with no connections. The French Revolution provided the opportunity. With the old officer corps decimated by exile or the guillotine, talent could rise with breathtaking speed. His first taste of fame came in 1793 at the Siege of Toulon. Royalists had invited the British fleet into France's key Mediterranean port. The siege was failing until the young Captain Bonaparte arrived. He saw what seasoned generals had missed. The key was not the city, but the heights commanding the harbor. His brilliant artillery plan, executed with ruthless efficiency, forced the British fleet to withdraw. At 24, he was promoted to brigadier general. The name Bonaparte began to be whispered in the halls of power. After a brief period out of favor, his decisive action in crushing a royalist uprising in Paris put him back in the Directory's good graces. His reward? Command of the struggling army of Italy in 1796. It was a poisoned chalice. The army was a demoralized, unpaid, and starving rabble. He arrived not with supplies, but with the force of his own will, a boundless self-confidence that was utterly magnetic.
"Soldiers," he proclaimed, "you are naked, ill-fed. The government owes you much, it can give you nothing. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world. Rich provinces, great cities will be in your power. You will find there honor, glory, and riches."
It was a promise of plunder, but also of glory. He spoke to them not as a distant general, but as a fellow soldier who understood their plight and offered a path to greatness. They believed him. He moved with astonishing speed, employing a new, dynamic form of warfare. He kept his forces concentrated, striking at the weak points where his enemies were divided. Victory followed victory. And his personal courage was legendary. At the Battle of Lodi, with Austrian cannons sweeping the bridge, he personally grabbed a standard and led a charge across, earning him the nickname the Little Corporal from his adoring soldiers. It was a term of endearment, a sign that he was one of them. It was at Lodi He would later say that he first believed himself a man of destiny. In less than a year, he had conquered northern Italy, defeated the might of the Austrian Empire, and redrawn the map of Europe on his own terms. He sent millions of francs and priceless works of art back to Paris, enriching the bankrupt Directory and cementing his own popularity. Through carefully managed dispatches and newspapers, he portrayed himself as an invincible hero, a modern-day Caesar, the savior of the Republic. Back in Paris, his fame was a threat to the weak Directory. They needed to get him out of the city. Napoleon, ever ambitious, proposed a masterstroke. With Britain, France's eternal enemy, protected by its navy, a direct invasion was impossible. So he conceived an imaginative, risky plan, an invasion of Egypt. The strategic goal was to disrupt Britain's lucrative trade routes to India. But Napoleon's vision was grander. He took with him not just an army, but a corps of over 160 scientists, artists, and scholars, the Institute of Egypt, to catalog, study, and claim the wisdom of the ancient world for France. After a grueling march across the desert, his army met the Mamluk cavalry near Cairo. Before the battle, he delivered one of history's most memorable lines. "Soldiers," he famously proclaimed, "from the height of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." His disciplined infantry squares shattered the Mamluk charges. Egypt was his. But the triumph was short-lived. Just weeks later, a British fleet under his great rival, Admiral Horatio Nelson, discovered the French Navy anchored at Aboukir Bay. In a daring nighttime attack, Nelson annihilated the French fleet. The victory was total. Napoleon and his army were trapped. The desert, once a path to glory, had become a prison. Though a military failure, the expedition's scientific mission was a spectacular success, discovering the Rosetta Stone, the key that would eventually unlock the secrets of ancient hieroglyphics. But Napoleon was a political animal. Hearing of renewed defeats in Europe and the Directory's crumbling authority, he made a fateful decision. In August 1799, he abandoned his army and secretly sailed for France, spinning the Egyptian campaign not as a defeat, but as a triumph he had left behind. He arrived to a hero's welcome. The public, fed on his propaganda, saw only the victor of Italy and the conqueror of the pyramids. In Paris, he found powerful conspirators, including the director Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, who were looking for a general, a sword, to help them overthrow the government and establish a more stable regime. They thought they could use Bonaparte and then discard him. They were wrong. On the 18th of Brumaire, November 9, 1799, the coup was launched. It was a clumsy, near-disastrous affair, but with his brother Lucien and loyal grenadiers, Napoleon seized control. The French Revolution was over. The age of Napoleon had begun. He was no longer just a general. He was the master of France. In late 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte returned from Egypt, abandoning his army but carefully curating the narrative of his campaign. He arrived to find a France teetering on the brink of collapse. The ruling Directory was corrupt, bankrupt, and had squandered the military gains of his earlier campaigns. The nation was racked by political instability and yearned for a savior. The public, fed a steady diet of propaganda celebrating his victories in Italy and the exotic wonders of Egypt, saw him not as a general who had deserted his post, but as the strong leader, the man of action needed to restore order and national pride. For Napoleon, a master of timing, France's crisis was his ultimate opportunity. He saw a power vacuum and he intended to fill it. Teaming up with political conspirators, he planned a coup d'etat for the 18th of Brumaire. What began as a political maneuver quickly descended into a tense standoff. When Napoleon addressed the legislative councils himself, he was met with furious resistance, accused of being a dictator, and physically accosted. The plan nearly failed. It was his brother, Lucien Bonaparte, who saved the day, rallying the palace guards by claiming Napoleon's life was in danger from dagger-wielding deputies. The soldiers stormed the chambers, and the government was dissolved by brute force. Out of the chaos, a new government, the Consulate, was formed. Napoleon swiftly outmaneuvered his co-conspirators, securing the title of First Consul, and with it, supreme authority. He was now, in all but name, the ruler of France. The journey from First Consul to Emperor was a masterclass in political consolidation. He used plebiscites, popular votes with overwhelming state-managed majorities, to grant his rule a veneer of democratic legitimacy. In 1804, having navigated assassination plots and secured peace with the Church through the Concordat of 1801, he made his final move. At Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, in a ceremony steeped in grandeur, he completed his meteoric rise. But this was no traditional coronation. In a moment of breathtaking audacity, he took the crown from the hands of Pope Pius VII and placed it on his own head before crowning his wife Josephine as Empress. The message was unmistakable and revolutionary. His power was not granted by God or inherited by birthright. It was seized by his own will, his own genius, his own ambition. The son of a minor Corsican noble was now Napoleon I, Emperor of the French. Yet, Napoleon himself believed his legacy would not be defined by his battles. "My true glory," he would later claim, "is not to have won 40 battles. Waterloo will erase the memory of so many victories. But what nothing will destroy, what will live forever, is my civil code." Promulgated in 1804, the Napoleonic Code was a revolutionary legal framework. It swept away the confusing tangle of feudal laws and royal decrees that had governed France for centuries. In its place, it established a unified, logical set of laws for all citizens. It enshrined the principles of legal equality, freedom of religion, and the abolition of hereditary privilege. It protected property rights, a cornerstone for the rising bourgeoisie. While it also controversially rolled back some rights for women, its influence was immense, becoming the foundation of modern legal systems not just in France, but across Europe, Latin America, and beyond. As emperor, his military genius, honed in Italy and Egypt, reached its absolute zenith. He forged the Grande Armée, the most formidable fighting force of its age, organized into flexible, fast-moving army corps under the command of his legendary marshals. This new way of war would be put to its greatest test on December 2, 1805, near the village of Austerlitz. Facing the combined armies of Austria and Russia, Napoleon executed his masterpiece. He deliberately weakened his right flank, luring the Allies into a trap. They took the bait, abandoning the strategic high ground of the Pratzen Heights to encircle him. At the decisive moment, as the morning sun burned through the fog, Napoleon ordered Marshal Soult's corps to storm the now empty heights, splitting the Allied army in two. The result was a devastating victory that shattered the Third Coalition and made Napoleon the undisputed master of continental Europe. In the wake of Austerlitz and subsequent victories at Jena Auerstedt and Friedland, Napoleon redrew the map of Europe according to his will. He dismantled the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire, replacing it with the Confederation of the Rhine, a French protectorate. He carved up conquered territories, creating new kingdoms and duchies, and placed his family on their thrones. His brother Joseph became King of Naples, Louis King of Holland, and Jerome King of Westphalia. His ambition seemed to have no borders. At Tilsit in 1807, he met Tsar Alexander I of Russia on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River, dividing Europe into French and Russian spheres of influence. For a brief moment, it seemed he had achieved a total, lasting dominance over the continent, but his ambition would soon meet its match, not on a conventional battlefield, but in the rugged mountains and arid plains of Spain. In 1808, in a move of cynical realpolitik, he deposed the Spanish king and installed his own brother Joseph on the throne.
He expected a swift and easy conquest. Instead, he ignited a firestorm of popular resistance. The Spanish people rose up in a brutal nationwide insurgency, pioneering a new and terrifying form of combat, guerrilla or little war. This was not a war of grand armies and decisive battles, but of ambushes, assassinations, and relentless attrition. It became known as the Spanish Ulcer, a bloody, unwinnable conflict that drained the French Empire of hundreds of thousands of troops and vast sums of money.
It shattered the myth of French invincibility and created a new front for Britain under the able command of Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, to challenge Napoleon's power directly. The Emperor's grand design was beginning to unravel. The year is 1812. At the zenith of his power, with an empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Vistula, Napoleon Bonaparte faced a single, defiant obstacle: Tsar Alexander I of Russia. The Tsar had broken with Napoleon's continental system, a continent-wide embargo against Britain that was strangling the Russian economy. For Napoleon, this was not just an economic betrayal, it was a personal affront, a challenge to his mastery over Europe. To punish this defiance, he assembled the largest European army in history. The Grande Armée, over 600,000 strong, a multinational force drawn from 20 nations, was a testament to his imperial might. On June 24th, under a sweltering summer sun, this immense force crossed the Niemen River. It was intended to be a swift, decisive campaign to bring the Tsar to heel. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Napoleon's strategy had always relied on speed, decisive battle, and living off the land. But the Russians, under the shrewd command of Barclay de Tolly, refused to play his game. They offered no glorious battle. Instead, they retreated, executing a brutal, scorched earth policy. They burned their own villages, destroyed their crops, and poisoned their wells, leaving nothing but ash and desolation in their wake. The Grande Armée was drawn deeper and deeper into the vast hostile interior, its supply lines stretching to the breaking point. The very land became a weapon. Starvation set in, and with it, disease. Dysentery, typhus, and exhaustion began to claim more men than any enemy soldier. The once magnificent army began to disintegrate from within, a slow, agonizing decay fueled by hunger and hopelessness. Just once, at Borodino, the Russians stood and fought. The result was one of the bloodiest single days of the 19th century, a horrific slaughter that left over 70,000 casualties. Napoleon claimed the field, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The Russian army, though battered, had not been destroyed. Weeks later, he finally entered Moscow. He expected a delegation of nobles to offer him the keys to the city, a symbol of his triumph. Instead, he captured a ghost city, eerily silent and almost entirely abandoned. Then, the fires began. Set by Russian patriots, the Great Fire of Moscow raged for days, consuming the ancient capital, and with it, any hope of shelter or supplies for the French. Napoleon, the master of Europe, was left stranded in a smoldering ruin, with the first snowflakes of the infamous Russian winter beginning to fall. The retreat was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. General Winter became his most ruthless enemy, a foe he could not outmaneuver. Temperatures plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. Men froze to death in their sleep. Horses, vital for transport and artillery, died in the thousands, their flesh often the only food available. Discipline collapsed, replaced by a primal struggle for survival. The retreat became a long, winding funeral procession, haunted by swarms of Cossack cavalry who picked off stragglers with chilling efficiency. The crossing of the Berezina River became a symbol of the horror, a desperate, chaotic struggle across makeshift bridges, under constant fire, where thousands were drowned, crushed, or left behind. Of the more than 600,000 men who had so proudly marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 frostbitten, starving specters straggled back across the Niemen. Napoleon had lost not just an army, but his aura of invincibility. The disaster in Russia emboldened his enemies. The nations of Europe, long chafing under French domination, saw their chance. Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and Russia formed a new, massive coalition. In October 1813, they cornered him at Leipzig. In the colossal Battle of the Nations, the largest battle in European history until the 20th century, Napoleon was decisively defeated. His German allies deserted him mid-battle, and his army was shattered. The defeat was total. His empire, built over a decade of brilliant victories, crumbled in a matter of months. Forced to abdicate, he was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. But the eagle would not be caged. In a stunning move, he escaped, returned to France, and rallied the nation for one last desperate gamble: the 100 Days. Europe scrambled to assemble its armies once more. It all came to a head on a rain-soaked field in modern-day Belgium at a place called Waterloo. Facing the Anglo-Allied army under the Duke of Wellington, Napoleon launched a series of brutal assaults. As the day wore on and the Prussian army arrived to seal his fate, he committed his last reserve, the one force that had never known defeat, his elite Imperial Guard. In a final, desperate act, he sent them forward to break Wellington's line. The Guard advanced with grim determination, the fate of an empire on their shoulders. But Wellington's line held firm. A devastating, point-blank volley tore through their ranks. For the first time in their history, the old Guard faltered, then stopped, then broke. The cry went up through the French ranks: "La Garde recule! The Guard retreats!" The sight of their invincible heroes being repulsed shattered the army's morale completely. The French army dissolved into a panicked rout. The dream of a French-dominated Europe, the grand ambition that had set a continent ablaze for 2 decades, died in the mud and blood of Waterloo. This time, there would be no second chances. He was exiled to St. Helena, a remote rock in the South Atlantic, a prison guarded by the unending sea. The man who had ruled a continent was now confined to a few square miles, waging one last war, a war of words, to shape his own legend for history. His life, a whirlwind of thunderous battles and world-shaking ambition, ended quietly in a lonely room, far from the world he had once commanded. His physical empire vanished, but his legacy endured, in law, in administration, and in the very idea of the modern nation-state he unintentionally sparked. He was a creator and a destroyer, a hero and a tyrant. Even legends can be forgotten by the world they built.